Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Ethan's hands brushed over a freshly planed walnut tabletop, his rough fingertips easily catching imperfections imperceptible to the naked eye. This garage workshop in suburban Texas is filled with the hiss of grinding wheels and the shrill whine of chainsaws, but to his ears it's nothing less than a symphony he's been conducting for 15 years. Wood shavings fell like a fine mist on his faded facecloth shirt, seeping into the muscular texture of his bronzed arms. "Dad, look what I did." The voice of his 12-year-old daughter, Chloe, pierced through the roar of the machinery. She held up an elaborate little birdhouse, her blue eyes like his shining with pride. Ethan put down the tools in his hands and wiped his hands on his with chip-stained overalls. "Let me see, my little craftsman." He took the birdhouse and scrutinized the tightly woven mortise and tenon joints and polished smooth edges. "You're getting better and better at your craft, and you're handling these joints better than I am. That's for sure. I'm studying under a famous master." Chloe playfully hopped up on a workbench, both legs waving in the air. "Mom just called, and she said she's going to be late again tonight for dinner with her new client." Ethan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Another new client. His wife, Vanessa, an interior designer, seems to have had more new clients in the last 6 months than tornadoes in Texas. She always said it was to expand the business and provide a better life for the family, but he always felt something was wrong. Vanessa and he come from two completely different worlds. Orphaned and bounced between foster homes and juvenile halls, it was the discipline of the military and the craft of carpentry that gave him a new lease on life. And Vanessa, who was born into a wealthy local family, exudes that innate sense of superiority. When they met, she was attracted to the raw, unadorned masculinity in him, and he saw in her a peace and belonging he had never had before. He thought they could bridge the gap between their worlds. He built this house for her with his hands and constructed the family he understood with sweat and loyalty. He valued loyalty more than life. It was the only thing he could trust in that underdog upbringing. The vibration of Chloe's cell phone pulled him back from his memories. My daughter glanced at the screen, and the smile on her face instantly froze, the blood quickly fading. "What's wrong?" Ethan's voice was low and strong. Chloe hesitated, her small hand trembling slightly as she turned the phone toward him. On the screen was a chat group among classmates, and a message stood out. "Oh my God, I was just at the Oak Creek restaurant and I saw Messrs. Henderson was with that TV host Julian Vance, and they looked so close." Attached below is a surreptitious, blurry photo of Vanessa tilting her head back and grinning broadly at a well-dressed man, whose hand is resting intimately on the back of her chair. Ethan's expression didn't change in the slightest, but deep within his eyes, a sleeping beast slowly opened them. "Who is Julian Vance?" he asked calmly. "It's that really famous anchor on the local news station, and Mom said last week that he's her most important client." Chloe's voice was thin as a fly. "Dad, they're probably just talking about work." "Maybe," Ethan said, but his mind was already racing, tying together all the details he'd deliberately ignored over the past few months. The nights when he'd come home late at night, the scent of expensive perfume he'd never heard before, and the flicker of detachment, bordering on pity, that flickered in her eyes when she looked at him. "What if it isn't?" Chloe's voice was tinged with sobs. Ethan rested his hand on his daughter's thin shoulder, the warmth of his palm firm and warm. "If not," he said in a single word, "we'll work it out together." Vanessa didn't come back that night. At midnight, she sent a text message saying that the client had talked so much that she decided to drive to Austin overnight to check out a project and wouldn't be back until tomorrow. Ethan looked at the text message and put it together with the picture, the truth coming to him like a cold jigsaw puzzle, complete. He went into the workshop and took a long gun case from a locked iron cabinet. Inside was his Winchester M70 rifle, an old buddy from his Army days. He hadn't touched it in years, just as he hadn't thought of his street-fighting self for survival in years. He thought Vanessa and Chloe were the harbor of his peaceful life, and now he discovers that the harbor itself is the center of the storm. The next afternoon, he was putting the finishing touches on a customer's order when the phone rang. It's Chloe's number. He picked up the phone, and the voice that came out of the receiver made the blood in his body freeze instantly. "Daddy." Chloe's voice was shaky, frightened, and laced with suppressed sobs. "Mommy's boyfriend is here. He said you weren't coming back, and that he was now my new dad. He tried to touch me, but I kicked him. Now he's smashing things and talking about teaching me how to listen. He laughed while saying you were too weak to stop him. The crunch of broken china and a man's arrogant laughter came over the background sound. Ethan's breathing stopped for a second. Then his voice became as cool and harsh as the cold Siberian wind. Chloe, listen to me. Stay in your room and lock the door. Don't open the door to anyone but me. I'll be right there. He hung up, moving as fast as lightning. He walked over to the steel cabinet, opened it with a spare key, and took out the Winchester rifle. His fingers calmly and steadily placed the 30-06 Springfield rifle cartridge presses into the chamber with a crisp click. Every movement felt like an instinct etched into his muscle memory. He grabbed his car keys and stormed out of the workshop. His Ford F-150 pickup let out a roar, and his tires left 2 deep marks on the gravel road. Those 10 minutes driving home were as long as a century. There was only one thought in his mind. This would be the last time in his life that he would laugh out loud. He's not the same little boy who quietly endured bullying in his foster home, or the soldier who had to follow orders in the army. He is a father, a man whose home has been invaded. As he rushed into his driveway, he saw Vanessa's white Lexus parked side by side with a silver Porsche he'd never seen before. The front door of the house was ajar, and from inside came Julian Vance's sickening voice, full of false gentleness and unabashed menace. Come on out, sweetie, and have a little heart-to-heart with your new daddy. Ethan kicked in the door. The living room was a mess. The antique vase that was Vanessa's favorite was shattered all over the floor. The family photo that hung on the wall was ripped off and thrown on the floor, and the framed glass was cracked into cobwebs. Vanessa stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale, a flash of panic in her eyes when she saw Ethan. Ethan, let me explain, it's not what you think. Ethan's gaze crossed over her and locked dead on the man at the top of the stairs. Julian Vance, dressed in a well-tailored designer suit, his hair immaculately coiffed, a hint of displeasure at being disturbed on his handsome face, but it was quickly replaced by arrogance. Oh, look who's back, our little Carpenter. Julian spread his arms wide and said in a condescending gesture, your wife is telling me how boring you are and how you don't deserve her. Ethan didn't say anything as he took one step up the stairs. His steps were steady and strong, each one like a step on Julian's nerves. Julian's smile began to stiffen as he seemed to then realize that the man in front of him was nothing like the contrary artisan he had imagined him to be. The man exuded a primal and dangerous aura, like a grizzly bear driven to desperation. Ethan, please, don't be impulsive. Vanessa is screaming downstairs. Look, man, it's just a misunderstanding, Julian said as he unconsciously stepped backward. As Ethan's foot hit the last step, he finally spoke, his voice low and terrible. You touched my daughter. I didn't. I was just trying to play a joke on her. Julian's back hit the wall, and there was no way back. He turned to Vanessa downstairs for help. Vanessa, tell him. But Ethan no longer wanted to hear any more explanations. That violent aura that he had suppressed for 20 years and came from the streets and battlefields completely exploded at this moment. He didn't shoot. The sound of the gun would have attracted the police and scared his daughter. Simply, ferociously, he swung the heavy Winchester rifle in his hand like a tomahawk. The hard butt of the gun made a deadly arc through the air and slammed solidly into Julian's jaw. The sound of bones breaking was clearly audible. Julian slumped to the ground like a broken sack, blood and broken teeth gushing from his mouth and splattering the clean white walls. Dad, Chloe's sobbing cries came from behind her bedroom door. Stay inside, sweetheart, Daddy's here. Ethan's voice instantly regained its gentleness, but it was only for his daughter. He turned and looked downstairs at the man who had collapsed to the ground. Julian groans in pain and tries to crawl away, but Ethan grabs him by the collar of his expensive suit and drags him to the stairway like a dead dog. Ethan, stop. You'll kill him. Vanessa rushes over and tries to stop him. Ethan stops at the top of the stairs, still holding onto Julian's collar. He turned his head to his wife, and the cold, vacant look in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. She had never seen his eyes like that before. There was no anger in them, no sadness, just a dead emptiness. You, his voice was eerily calm, brought this into my home, into my daughter's presence. I didn't know he would. She tried to argue. You never note. Ethan interrupts her, dragging Julian's body so that he rolls down the stairs. Julian's body rolled and crashed like a rag doll on the carpeted steps with a series of dull thuds. You never think about consequences, about loyalty, about trust. By the time Julian rolled downstairs, Ethan had made his way to his side. He stomped on Julian's hand as he tried to fight back, and the sound of bone cracking underneath his foot caused Vanessa to let out a scream. Please. Julian slurred his pleas, his face a mixture of blood, tears, and fear. I will never see you again. You're right. Ethan dragged him to the door and threw him outside in the driveway like a bag of trash. If you ever come near my family again, everything that happened today will seem like a gentle massage to you. Vanessa stood in the doorway, in tears. Ethan, I can explain. He turned slowly and looked at her. It was in this moment that she finally got a good look at the man who hid beneath the appearance of a stoic artisan. The man who fought in the streets and survived on the battlefield. The man she despised and betrayed. Pack your things, he said. I'll give you an hour. In an hour, if you're still here, I'll throw you out like him. You can't do that, she protested. I have a share in this house too. For the first time a smile appeared on Ethan's face, a cruel, cruel smile without the slightest hint of warmth. This house. I built this house with my own hands, brick by brick. This is a family that I supported alone while you were busy looking for excitement and superiority. He took a step forward and lowered his voice, each word like a hardened knife. Now, I'm going to take everything you have. Your reputation, your career, your ridiculous sense of superiority. I will destroy them all, little by little, until you understand what it is like to lose everything you hold dear. With that said, he stopped looking at her and turned to walk up the stairs towards Chloe's room. When he knocked on the door of his daughter's room, his voice resumed that irreplaceable tenderness. Chloe, it's Daddy. You can open the door. The door opened a crack and Chloe poked her head out. The moment she saw her father, she threw herself into his arms and let out a sob. Ethan held her close and gently stroked her hair. It's okay, baby. Daddy's here. No one can hurt you anymore. He held his daughter, smelling the fresh scent of shampoo in her hair, and the monstrous anger in his heart was gradually replaced by something colder and more determined. This is not the end. This is just the beginning. As night fell, Ethan's friend, Marcus, a retired Marine, pulled into the driveway in his armored-looking Dodge Ram. Marcus is built like a wall, with a neck tattoo that goes all the way behind his ear. They had served in the same unit and were brothers who could take a bullet for each other. It's worse than the phone call said. Marcus walked into the wrecked living room and glanced at Julian Vance, who was lying groaning in the driveway, struggling to pull out his cell phone. Do me a favor and get him out of here and make sure he doesn't die on my doorstep. Ethan's voice was calm. And then, help me bring Chloe to your house for a few days. Marcus nodded, not asking a single more question. He walked over to Julian, picked him up like a chicken, and shoved him into the driver's seat of the Porsche. Roll with it, if you don't want to need reconstructive surgery on the other side of your jaw as well. Julian glanced at Marcus in horror, then at Ethan, who stood in the doorway, as cold as a statue, and started the car in a hasty flight. After settling their daughter, Ethan and Marcus sat in the workshop, surrounded by the familiar scent of wood. Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. She'll fight back. Marcus spoke up, breaking the silence. A woman like her would blame you for everything. She'll say you're violent, that you're insane. I know. Ethan twirled the glass in his hand. So we have to be faster and harder than her. His cell phone rings, and it's Vanessa. He hung up. The phone rang again, and he hung up again. On the third ring, Marcus signaled for him to pick up. You'd better listen to what she's trying to say. Marcus said, know your enemy. Ethan hit the answer button and put it on speakerphone. Ethan, please, let's talk. Vanessa's voice came over the receiver, full of desperation and disguised remorse. Julian's been hospitalized. He called the police. The police will come for you, and you'll go to jail. Are you threatening me? Ethan's voice didn't have a ripple in it. No, I'm doing you a favor. Julian's family is very powerful. They won't leave you alone. As long as you stop now and apologize to me, we can. Apologize. Ethan interrupts her and lets out a sneer. Apologize for me protecting my daughter? Apologize for bringing an animal into my home. There was silence on the other end of the line. Listen, Vanessa. Ethan's voice became low and dangerous. Because I'm only going to say this once. Our marriage is over. You're not welcome in this house. My daughter is not welcome. If you or Julian or any of those powerful family members behind you ever bother me again, you've seen what happens when someone threatens my family. Ethan, I love you. With her last weapon, she tried to arouse his old feelings. He laughed, and there was contempt in that laugh. No, you don't love me. You love the stability I provide, the fact that I can be a shield for your dirty deeds. You never loved me. You just loved that I loved you. His voice hardened steeply. And that will be the biggest mistake you will ever make in your life. What do you mean? You'll see. Everything you've built on lies, your social status, your design career, your flashy circle of friends, I'll tear it all down with my own hands. It's like tearing down a substandard building, one by one, piece by piece, until you have nothing left. Don't you dare. Her pleas turned to screams. I will destroy you. You can try. Ethan's voice was laced with steel determination. But don't forget, I grew up rolling around in the mud. I know how to survive and how to fight. And you, Vanessa, you're just playing a game called life. Now the game is over. He hung up and looked at Marcus. I need you to help me. I need information, all information about Julian Vance and his family. And Vanessa's clients, her social circle, her everything. Wrap it up. Marcus stood up. I know people who can dig up secrets buried 3 feet underground. What are you going to do? Ethan stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the vast Texas night sky. She's trying to play public opinion, trying to portray me as a crazy person. Then I'll let her play. The corners of his mouth curved into a cold arc. But war, it is never fought on just one battlefield. She chose to use lies as a weapon, and I, the truth. Over the next few days, as Marcus expected, all sorts of rumors about Ethan began to circulate on the town's social media. Vanessa's friends, the dames she usually has afternoon tea with and attends charity dinners with, are spreading the truth among their circle. Ethan has been a violent control freak. Vanessa has been living in his shadow for years, and Julian, who was just a good Samaritan trying to help her out of her misery, has been savagely attacked by Ethan. Attack. Vanessa herself posted a long, tearful post on her social media accounts, accompanied by a photo of herself with a bruise in the corner of her eye, which was actually a carefully applied makeup. She portrays herself as a tragic heroine who has risked everything for love, only to be hurt by reality, suggesting that Ethan's mental state is extremely unstable and has caused great harm to her and the innocent Julian. Ethan is oblivious to all this. He runs his workshop as usual during the day and spends his evenings with Marcus in front of an encrypted computer, combing through vast amounts of information. Found it. One night, Marcus pointed to a document on the screen and said, Julian Vance, ostensibly a Star TV anchor, behind the scenes, he used his fame and connections to participate in a money laundering ring involving local real estate development. They use shell companies, buy land at low prices, then modify the plans through connections in the council and sell it at a high price, making a huge difference. Ethan's eyes lit up. How much does Vanessa know? Watch this. Marcus pulled another document, a contract between Vanessa Design and several shell companies. She does interior design for several upscale properties developed by this group, with outrageous design fees. It's not just a design fee, it's a cut. She's deeply involved and may even be one of the financial handlers for the group. Ethan's heart sank. He'd always thought her betrayal was only emotional and physical, and now he realized that she'd long ago made their home the cornerstone of her criminal empire. There's more fun. Marcus pulled up some more photos and videos of Julian Vance's private life documented. This guy is unisex, has an extremely messy private life, and has even had illicit relationships with some minors. If this stuff comes out, he'll spend the rest of his life in jail, not to mention his anchor career. Ethan looked at the unpleasant images on the screen with no disgust in his eyes, only the calmness of a hunter seeing his prey fall into a trap. Very good. He turned off the computer. Step 1. Start by clipping her wings. By wings, he means Vanessa's core supporters in her social circle, a woman named Isabella, the wife of a local tycoon, and the one who's been attacking Ethan most vigorously online. The next day, Ethan sends Isabella an anonymous delivery. There were no threatening letters in there, just a couple of high-resolution photos. In the photo, it's Isabella's husband, the esteemed tycoon, behaving intimately with a younger man in a gay bar. Less than 24 hours after the courier was mailed, Vanessa received an exasperated phone call from Isabella. "Vanessa, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? That Carpenter husband of yours is a devil." On the other end of the line, Isabella's voice was filled with fear. Immediately after, Vanessa took to social media to see that Isabella had deleted all comments attacking Ethan and announced that she would be stepping away from social media for a while to focus on her family. Vanessa's public opinion offensive has, for the first time, come up short. She felt the first chill. She realized that the alliances she thought were solid as gold were fragile in the face of a real threat. She thought Ethan would only use his fists to solve problems, but she didn't realize that he was using a much deadlier weapon. Ethan, on the other hand, has embarked on the second step of the program. He anonymously contacted the State Department of Revenue and the FBI to leak evidence of alleged money laundering at Julian Vance and Vanessa in batches and strategically. Instead of throwing out all the evidence at once, he plays his cards one by one like a seasoned poker player, leaving his opponents to slowly crumble in endless fear and speculation. Soon, Vanessa tastes the bitter fruit. One afternoon, she was trying to stabilize herself at an upscale restaurant with two potential allies when she realized at the checkout that all her credit cards had been frozen. In the strange gazes of the people around her, she woefully transferred money with her cell phone before paying, and the two so-called allies made excuses to quickly leave. Immediately afterward, IRS investigators appeared like ghosts in her office and took away all the ledgers and computers. Her important clients all disappeared overnight, and she couldn't get through to them on the phone, nor did she reply to their messages. Her world, beginning to peel away from the edges, piece by piece. Panic wrapped around Vanessa like a vine. She and Julian are holed up in one of their love nests, a luxury apartment, discussing what to do. They decided to fight back. "He has a military background. He must have an unclean past," Julian said through gritted teeth. "Let's find a private investigator and dig out all his previous dark information. I don't believe he's a saint." They soon found a private investigator, a man named Ricardo, who claimed to be all-powerful, through an intermediary. They pay a large sum of cash and ask Ricardo to look into Ethan's past, specifically all of his records from his time in the military and foster homes, in the hopes of finding the dirt that will bring him down. What they don't know, however, is that this Ricardo has an unwritten rule in his circle: investigate the employer before taking the job. When he discovers that his employer is Julian Vance, who is being targeted by the media and government agencies, he keeps an eye out. And when he starts investigating Ethan, he goes through some old files and finds Ethan and Marcus military service records. Coincidentally, one of Ricardo's cousins also spent time in that unit and was on good terms with Marcus. So, late one night, Ricardo's phone calls Marcus' cell phone. "Hey Marcus, it's me, Ricardo. I took on an interesting job. Someone offered me a big price to check out your buddy Ethan." A sneer played at the corner of Marcus' mouth. "Is that right? Let them check. We happen to want to see what tricks they can play." A few days later, Ricardo gave Julian and Vanessa a detailed report of his investigation. The report states that Ethan has a bad record for fighting against abuse in his foster home, and that he was disciplined for excessive violence while serving in the military. Julian and Vanessa were ecstatic about this blackmail. They feel like they've finally caught Ethan in the act and can turn things around. Julian immediately utilized his remaining media connections to spin this dark story in an attempt to portray Ethan as a dangerous man with a chronic propensity for violence. What they waited for, however, was not a reversal of public opinion, but an even heavier blow. The storm came early the next morning. Ethan anonymously sent evidence of Julian Vance's chaotic private life, especially those parts involving minors, to several national news outlets and online tipster platforms. He chose to do it after Julian threw out his dirty laundry in order to make his counterattacks seem even more lethal. Famous anchor Julian Vance, in deep scandal, allegedly inappropriate relationships with minors, is a story that has spread like a virus across the internet. Those unpleasant photos and videos, although the key parts were mosaicked, but enough for the public to see what kind of rotten life this on-screen moralistic anchor is living in private. Public outrage was completely ignited. The dramatic contrast between a man who just moments ago was accusing others of being violent and in the blink of an eye is exposed as a beast with a human face has completely bankrupted his credibility. His name, and that of his family, became synonymous with scandal and disgrace overnight. Julian's TV station was the first to announce that it was suspending him from all duties and cooperating with the police investigation. His father, a major player in the Texas business community, issued a chilling statement at the first sign of the news, announcing that he was severing all ties with Julian Vance and condemning his disgraceful personal behavior. Julian's world, in 24 hours, came crashing down. He went from being a pride of nature to a street rat that everyone was calling out. Vanessa was in her luxury apartment, shivering as she watched the news scroll by on the TV. She knew that this was Ethan's revenge. Not only did he anticipate their actions, he even used their counterattacks to make his revenge seem more thunderous. She received one last text from Julian. "You bitch. You're the one who ruined me. I won't let you go even as a ghost." Then Julian's phone never worked again. A few days later, the news reported that police found him in a motel. He had become delirious from the overdose of contraband and was forcibly transported to a withdrawal center. Julian struck out looking. Now, she's left alone to face Ethan's silent and deadly vengeance. Her design firm had its license officially revoked for alleged money laundering and tax fraud. Her name made the industry blacklist. The talented independent designer persona that she had been cultivating for years collapsed. Clients and friends who once courted her now shun her, as if she were some deadly virus. Bank accounts were frozen and credit cards were deactivated. Soon, she couldn't even afford to pay the rent on her luxury apartment. The landlord unceremoniously evicted her along with her expensive luggage. Dragging several large suitcases and standing on a busy street, Vanessa felt true despair for the first time. She had nowhere to go. She tried contacting her family, but her parents just coldly told her on the phone that she had dishonored the entire family and not to contact them again until things settled down. Everything she was proud of and relied on, beauty, wealth, connections, family background, all came to naught under Ethan's precise and brutal blows. At a cheap motel, she got a room with the only cash she had left on her. The room smelled like a mixture of mildew and disinfectant. She looked at her haggard face in the mirror and finally couldn't help but let out a sob. She didn't understand how things had come to this. Why was she so devastated when she made a mistake that many women make in the world? She thought Ethan would just get angry, rant and rave with her like a crude mangina. That way, she can take the moral high ground, play the victim, and win everyone's sympathy. But he didn't. Like a surgeon of the highest caliber, he calmly, knife by knife, removed all the tissues on which she depended, leaving her to slowly necrose in silent agony. Just as she was on the verge of a breakdown, there was a knock on the door of her room. Thinking it was the hotel cleaner, she opened the door only to see someone unexpected. Marcus, Ethan's brother who looks like a gangbanger. "Mrs. Henderson." Marcus' voice was emotionless. "Ethan asked me to give you a message." Vanessa eyed him warily, her body blocking the doorway. "What does he want? He's already ruined everything for me. What more does he want?" Marcus ignored her questioning and simply took a document out of his pocket and handed it to her. "It's a divorce settlement. Ethan waived his recourse to your marital property, which means that he won't want a penny of that money of yours that he got through illegal means, if he can recover some of it in the future." Vanessa froze. This seems to be a turnaround. He only had one condition. Marcus continued. "Relinquish custody of Chloe and voluntarily sign a restraining order guaranteeing that you will not initiate contact with Chloe for any reason until she reaches the age of majority." "What?" Vanessa screamed. "He tried to take my daughter." "No way. It's not robbery." Marcus' eyes turned cold. "It's protection. You've proven that you're not qualified to be a mother. You put your daughter in danger for your own selfish desires. Ethan won't give you a second chance." He left the papers on the floor by the door. "Ethan says you can choose not to sign. Then he'll turn over the rest of the evidence. The recordings of you and Julian conspiring and discussing how to use Chloe to threaten him, all to the police and Child Protective Services. At that point, you'll be facing not just the loss of custody, but criminal charges of conspiracy to injure a child. You weigh yourself." With that, Marcus turned and walked away, leaving Vanessa alone in the doorway. She looked at the divorce papers on the floor and felt that they were not paper, but a red-hot branding iron. Signing it meant that she would lose her daughter completely, her last bit of identity as a mother. If she doesn't sign, she will be disgraced and even jailed. Ethan, her husband whom she despised and thought she could take as she pleased, had set a desperate trap for her. He left her no choice but two paths to hell. At that moment, she finally understood completely. Ethan's revenge isn't about making her suffer. It's about making her lose everything. It wasn't her tears and remorse he wanted. He wanted her gone for good. Wiped clean from his life, from his daughter's life, from the world. She collapsed to the ground and let out a beastly wail. In that voice, there was no more of the old pride and calculation, only pure, crushed despair. Eventually, Vanessa signed the divorce papers. The fear of prison overwhelmed her poor motherly love and self-respect. She showed up alone at the lawyer's office on a dreary afternoon and signed her name. The whole time, she didn't say a word, and her face was as gray as an old newspaper. She gave up custody of her daughter, gave up all her possessions, and left the city where she had lived for more than 30 years like a ghost, without a word. She is said to have sold her last piece of designer jewelry to scrape together a one-way ticket to the West Coast. Ethan's life, on the other hand, is back on track. The workshop is doing as well as ever. Those old and familiar customers, after the storm, instead respected him more. They saw how a man, in his own way, defended his family and his dignity. Ethan's actions are seen by many as what a real man should be in the land of Texas, where family and honor are prized. Chloe is also slowly coming out of her trauma. Ethan hired the best therapist for her, and he, himself, spent more time with her. Together, they did woodworking in the workshop, went fishing on the lake on weekends, and watched the stars under the porch at night. That terrible experience, like a fever, though painful, burned away the last vestiges of separation between father and daughter, making their relationship closer and stronger than ever. One day, Chloe was doing her homework when she looked up and asked him, "Daddy, do you hate Mommy?" Ethan was sanding a piece of cherry wood and stopped what he was doing at the sound of his voice. He thought for a moment and answered seriously, "I used to hate it, but now no." He looked into his daughter's clear eyes and continued, "Hating someone is like keeping a poisonous snake inside yourself. It bites you every day and gives you no peace. All I want now is to get rid of this snake and get on with our lives." Chloe nodded plausibly. A few months later, Julian Vance's case went to trial. Because of the overwhelming evidence and public pressure, he was convicted on several counts and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. The star anchor, once a TV sensation, will spend the rest of his life inside the high walls. The money laundering gang behind him was also uprooted, and several local political and business celebrities fell from grace as a result. Ethan saw it all on the news, and there was no expression on his face. For him, it was just an ending that had been written a long time ago. Marcus came to his workshop and handed him a cold beer. "It's over, bro." Ethan took the beer and touched it to him. "Yeah, it's over. What are the plans for the future?" Ethan looked at the half-finished furniture in the workshop and smelled the familiar aroma of wood in the air with a long-lost, heartfelt smile on his face. "What else is the plan? Continue to be my carpenter, raise Chloe, and watch her go to college, get married, and live the life she wants to live." His life, seemingly back to square one, but something else has changed forever. He is still the same quiet craftsman who loves his craft, but inside, he has an extra hardened and sharpened edge. Some things, he learned, cannot be compromised. There are some bottom lines that cannot be touched. He won a war in his own way. He didn't kill anyone. He didn't set any fires. He didn't even raise his voice a couple times. He just calmly and methodically exploited the greed, arrogance, and stupidity of his opponents and allowed them to personally destroy everything he had built. This is perhaps the most brilliant revenge of all. Not so much for the opponent to be physically destroyed, but for them to be spiritually, watching their world turn to ashes and being powerless to do anything about it. A year later, Ethan's workshop received a large order to design and build all the reading tables and chairs for a new local library. It is a landmark project and the highest recognition of his craft and character. At the opening of the library, he brought Chloe along. Many people came up to shake his hand and congratulate him. He saw that Isabella had come too, She was now the head of a charitable foundation and looked much more composed and kind than before. She nodded to Ethan from a distance, her eyes complicated. Ethan responded politely. Between him and her, there was no hatred, only a deal that was long overdue. After the ceremony, he and Chloe walked through the library, the sunlight pouring in through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows and shining on the tables and chairs, handmade by him and glowing with warmth. "It's beautiful, Daddy." Chloe caressed the smooth tabletop with heartfelt admiration. "As you like." They walked over to a bookshelf and Chloe pulled out a book on ancient Greek mythology. She turned to one of the pages and pointed to the illustration on it and said to Ethan, "Look, Daddy, this is Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance." The teacher said that she represents the judgment of justice for all who are proud and for evil. Ethan looked at the goddess with the sword and the scales in the book and didn't say anything. He's not a god. He's just a mortal, a father. What he did was not about judgment or justice. He's just guarding, in his own way, the only thing he holds dear in this world. His shadow was drawn in the sunlight, casting a long shadow over the world he had built with his own hands. The shadow, solid, silent, full of unshakable power. After weathering the storms of betrayal and the flames of revenge, he finally finds his own true peace. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.